Captain Sarah Chen pressed her face against the viewport of the transport ship, Defiance, watching the massive space station grow larger as they approached. Kepler Station stretched across the void like a metal city, its spinning rings and jutting towers housing representatives from 47 different species. Somewhere in those corridors, decisions were being made about humanity's future in the Galactic Defense Coalition. "First time seeing the real deal?" asked Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, settling into the seat beside her. His dark eyes reflected the same mixture of awe and nervousness that Sarah felt. "Pictures don't do it justice," Sarah admitted. The station was easily 50 times larger than anything humans had built. Even their newest orbital facilities looked like toys compared to this monument to galactic cooperation. 3 years ago, humanity had finally achieved faster-than-light travel. Within 6 months, they'd made contact with the Coalition, a military alliance of species that had been fighting a brutal war against something called the Devourers for over 2 centuries. The Coalition had been polite but distant when humanity requested membership. After all, what could a species that had barely left its own solar system offer to civilizations that had been traveling the stars for millennia? The answer, according to most Coalition members, was nothing. "Attention, passengers," came the pilot's voice over the intercom. "We'll be docking in 15 minutes. All military personnel report to Base 7 immediately upon arrival." Sarah adjusted her newly pressed Coalition uniform. The blue and silver fabric felt strange after years in Earth Defense Force green, but it represented something important. Humanity had been granted observer status in the Coalition 6 months ago, a polite way of letting them watch real military operations while keeping them away from anything dangerous. The docking bay buzzed with activity as various species moved about their business. Sarah had studied the major Coalition races extensively, but seeing them in person was different. The towering, four-armed Valdris moved with surprising grace despite their size. The crystalline Thek communicated through color changes that rippled across their translucent bodies. Insectoid Zephyrians skittered along the walls using specialized grip pads. "Impressive, isn't it?" Sarah turned to find a Valdris officer approaching. His skin was the deep purple that indicated high military rank, and his forearms were adorned with more medals than Sarah had ever seen. "General KX," she said, snapping to attention. The Coalition's supreme military commander was legendary even among humans. "At ease, Captain Chen. Walk with me." His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in battles across half the galaxy. "Your species has been quite persistent in requesting combat assignments." They walked through corridors lined with viewports showing the endless stars beyond. "We want to contribute, sir. Earth has been peaceful, but our military has trained extensively for the possibility of conflict." General KX's laugh was like grinding stone. "Peace. Yes, we read your files. No major conflicts for nearly 8 decades. Your longest war lasted only 6 of your years. Most curious." Sarah bristled slightly. "Humans learn quickly, General. Our rapid technological advancement should demonstrate that." "Technology, yes. But war is not about technology alone, Captain. It is about will, about the ability to face death and worse for your comrades, about making decisions when everything depends on those decisions." He stopped at an observation deck where the view showed Coalition ships moving in perfect formation. "These skills are earned through blood and loss. Your species has had little of either." The words stung because they carried truth. Humanity's most recent conflicts had been regional disputes settled through negotiation or limited engagement. Nothing approached the scale of the Coalition's centuries-long war against the Devourers. "The Zephyrians lost their homeworld," General KX continued. "The Thek have seen 3 core systems consumed entirely. The Valdris have been fighting this war for longer than your civilization has existed. What can your peaceful species offer us that we lack?" Before Sarah could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The lights shifted to emergency red as automated voices announced in multiple languages. All personnel to battle stations. Devourer fleet detected. All personnel to battle stations. General KX's expression shifted instantly from casual conversation to battle-hardened focus. It seems your first observation mission may be more educational than planned, Captain. The next few hours blurred together. Sarah and Marcus were assigned to the command center of the Coalition battleship Eternal Vigilance, where they watched as the massive fleet prepared for engagement. The efficiency was breathtaking, hundreds of ships moving into formation with practiced precision. Devourer fleet confirmed, reported the Thek navigation officer, her crystalline body pulsing urgent orange. 67 vessels, including 3 harvest ships. Sarah studied the tactical display. The Devourer ships looked wrong somehow, as if they'd been grown rather than built. Organic curves mixed with technological components in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Standard engagement pattern, ordered Admiral Thanks, a Voldris whose scars told stories of dozens of previous battles. Heavy ships advance while fast attack craft flank from the dimensional fold points. The battle began exactly as Coalition doctrine prescribed. Sarah had studied their tactics extensively, complex maneuvers developed over centuries of warfare. The Coalition forces moved like dancers, each ship knowing its role in the greater pattern. But something was wrong. "They're not responding as expected," muttered the tactical officer. "The Devourers are adapting to our standard formations." On screen, the enemy fleet moved in ways that seemed to anticipate every Coalition maneuver. Where doctrine said they should retreat, they advanced. Where they should mass their forces, they scattered. It was as if they knew exactly what the Coalition would do next. "How many times have you used these same tactics?" Marcus asked quietly. Admiral Thanks's eyes narrowed. "These formations have been perfected over 200 years of warfare. They are tested and proven. Against an enemy who's been fighting you for 200 years, Sarah realized. They know your tactics as well as you do." The battle was going badly. Coalition ships were taking heavy damage as their predictable movements left them vulnerable to Devourer weapons. The enemy seemed to know exactly where each ship would be before it arrived there. "Sir," Sarah stepped forward, knowing she was likely ending her career. "Request permission to make a tactical suggestion." The bridge fell silent. Admiral Thanks stared at her with 4 eyes that had seen more battles than Earth had recorded wars. "You wish to instruct me in combat, human? The Devourers are reading your patterns because they've seen them hundreds of times. They're not just fighting your ships, they're fighting your doctrine. And what would you suggest? That we abandon centuries of proven strategy?" Sarah moved to the tactical display, her heart pounding. "Not abandon, break. Do something they've never seen before." She began highlighting ship positions on the hologram. "Your heavy cruisers are advancing in the standard wall formation. The Devourers are already moving to exploit the gaps they know will appear. But what if instead of advancing, the heavies suddenly stopped and pivoted? What if your fast attack craft came from above the orbital plane instead of from the fold points?" Admiral Thanks studied the display. "This formation has no precedent. It violates established doctrine." "Exactly," Marcus added, catching on. "It's unpredictable because it's never been done." The tactical officer, a young Zephyrian, looked up from her instruments. "Admiral, conventional formation Delta 7 will result in estimated 43% losses based on current Devourer positioning." The Admiral's scarred hands gripped the command console. Around him, his bridge crew waited. These beings had survived by following doctrine, by trusting in patterns proven by the deaths of billions. "Captain Chen," he said finally, "you understand that if your suggestion fails, thousands will die?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. And if we continue with predictable tactics, thousands will die anyway. But if we succeed, another explosion rocked the ship as Devourer weapons found their mark exactly where Coalition doctrine said the target would be. "Admiral!" The communications officer's voice cracked with urgency. "The Stellar Crown is reporting critical damage. They're requesting emergency support." Admiral Thanks stared at the tactical display for another moment. The Coalition formation was crumbling exactly as Sarah had predicted, not because the ships or crews were inadequate, but because the enemy knew every move before it was made. "All ships," he announced. "Implement formation. Improvisation Alpha. Heavy cruisers full reverse. Attack craft. Ascend to 30 degrees orbital plane and prepare for unconventional engagement vectors." Confusion rippled through the fleet communications as ship captains tried to understand orders that matched no known doctrine. But the Coalition military was nothing if not disciplined. Within minutes, 200 ships were moving in a pattern that had never been attempted in combat. The effect was immediate. Devourer ships that had been moving to intercept Coalition forces in their expected positions suddenly found themselves firing at empty space. Their own formations, optimized to counter standard Coalition tactics, left them vulnerable to attacks from unexpected angles. "Direct hit on Devourer command ship," reported the tactical officer, her voice filled with surprise. "Their formation is... they're confused. They're not adapting." For the first time in over an hour, Coalition weapons were hitting their targets while enemy fire missed or struck reinforced sections rather than vulnerable points. The battle's momentum was shifting. "Captain Chen," Admiral Thanks said without taking his eyes from the display, "it appears your species may have something to offer after all." But Sarah was already studying the enemy's new movements, watching as the Devourers struggled to adapt to completely unpredictable human tactical thinking. "This is just the beginning, Admiral. Humans don't just think outside the box. We throw the box away and build something new." As the Coalition fleet pressed its unexpected advantage, word was already spreading through the command network. The humans had done something no one in 2 centuries of warfare had managed. They had surprised the Devourers. In the depths of space, Devourer command vessels were transmitting urgent messages to their larger fleet. For the first time in their ancient war, they had encountered tactics they could not predict or counter. The word spread through their collective consciousness like wildfire. The galaxy had been introduced to humanity's greatest strength, not their technology or their courage, but their fundamental inability to do things the way they had always been done. Where other species perfected their methods over centuries, humans never stopped changing, adapting, creating new solutions to old problems. General KX watched the battle reports stream in from his position on Kepler Station. The humans had turned a certain defeat into a tactical victory, using nothing but unpredictability and creative thinking. He touched a control surface, opening a priority communication channel. "Begin immediate reassessment of human military capabilities," he ordered, "and prepare authorization for full Coalition combat integration. It appears we've been asking the wrong questions about our new allies." The Battle of Kepler Station was ending, but the war was about to change. Humanity was no longer a whisper in the galactic conversation. They were about to become a roar that would shake the foundations of a conflict older than human civilization itself. Deep in Coalition intelligence archives, automated systems began updating humanity's threat assessment level. Where once they had been classified as minimal military value, new designations appeared. Unpredictable tactical innovation, non-standard strategic thinking, and most importantly, potential force multiplier. The Devourers had spent 2 centuries learning to counter every known military doctrine in the galaxy. But they had never encountered a species that treated doctrine as merely a starting point rather than an end goal. Lieutenant Rodriguez watched the last Devourer ships retreat into hyperspace. "Think they'll remember this battle?" Captain Chen smiled grimly. "I hope so, because we're just getting started." 2 weeks after the Battle of Kepler Station, Captain Sarah Chen found herself standing in a briefing room she never expected to see. The Coalition High Command Chamber was restricted to senior officers with decades of combat experience. Yet here she stood alongside Admiral Thanks and a dozen other Coalition commanders, all staring at a holographic display showing the Xerion system. "The Devourers are massing here," General KX explained, manipulating the display to show dozens of enemy ships. "Intelligence estimates they're preparing a major offensive against the Helix Nebula colonies. If they succeed, 17 billion civilians will be lost." The numbers were staggering. Sarah had never imagined warfare on such a scale. Earth's entire population was barely 8 billion. Standard response would be to intercept them here. Admiral Thanks indicated a point between two star systems. "Force engagement before they reach inhabited space." "But that's exactly what they expect," said Commander Rilke, a Zephyrian whose chitinous exoskeleton bore scars from countless battles. "Since Kepler Station, they've been adapting again. Our scouts report they're positioning specifically to counter conventional interception tactics." General KX's four arms gestured to the display. "We need something unconventional. Something they cannot predict." His eyes fixed on Sarah. "Captain Chen, your species seems to specialize in the impossible." Sarah studied the tactical situation. The Devourer fleet was massive, easily 3 times larger than the Coalition force available. Conventional wisdom said to avoid direct engagement entirely, instead focusing on hit-and-run attacks to slow their advance. "What about their supply lines?" she asked. "Devourers don't have traditional supply lines," explained Dr. Venth, a Thek scientist whose crystalline body pulsed with data streams. "They consume organic matter from conquered worlds to fuel themselves. They're completely self-sufficient once they begin harvesting." "But they haven't started harvesting yet," Lieutenant Rodriguez pointed out. He'd been assigned as Sarah's tactical aide, the first human to hold such a position in Coalition history. "They're still in approach formation." Sarah walked around the holographic display, viewing it from different angles. "How long can they maintain that formation without feeding?" "Approximately 47 standard days," Dr. Venth replied after a moment of calculation. "But no Coalition force has ever succeeded in preventing Devourer access to organic matter for more than 12 days. "Because you've been fighting them where they want to fight," Sarah realized. "In space, where they can use their superior numbers and proven tactics. What if we don't fight them at all?" The room fell silent. Admiral Thanks was the first to speak. "Explain." Sarah highlighted several points on the display. "The Devourers are heading for these colonies because they need to feed. But what if those colonies weren't there when they arrived?" "Impossible," Commander Rilke clicked his mandibles in agitation. 17 billion beings cannot simply disappear." "They can, if they're evacuated." Sarah began drawing new paths on the hologram. "Not to other colonies where the Devourers can follow, but to mobile fleet bases, deep space platforms that can move and hide." Dr. Venth's body flashed bright yellow, the Thek expression of extreme skepticism. "The logistics alone would be overwhelming. Transport ships, life support, food production." "The Coalition has been fighting a defensive war for 2 centuries, Marcus added, understanding Sarah's thinking. "You've built massive mobile command ships, fleet bases, factory vessels. You already have the infrastructure, you just need to use it differently." General KX studied the proposal. "You're suggesting we abandon fixed positions entirely, make the entire Coalition mobile." "For this operation, yes." Sarah manipulated the display to show potential movement patterns. The Devourers arrive expecting to find rich colonies to harvest. Instead, they find empty worlds. No food, no fuel, no reason to stay. Meanwhile, our evacuated civilians are safe on mobile platforms scattered across the sector. "And while they're searching for colonies that aren't there, we hit them," Marcus continued. "Small strikes, Constant harassment. Keep them moving, keep them hungry until they're forced to withdraw or split their forces. Admiral Thanks's scarred hands moved over the control surface, running tactical simulations. The computer models suggest this strategy has a 67% chance of forcing Devourer withdrawal without major fleet engagement. Better odds than direct confrontation, Commander Rilk admitted grudgingly. General KX stood silent for several minutes, his forearms folded as he considered the proposal. Finally, he spoke. Captain Chen, you're suggesting we fundamentally change how the Coalition conducts military operations, abandon positions we've held for generations, risk the lives of billions on an untested strategy. Yes, sir. And if you're wrong, if the mobile platforms are detected, if the evacuation fails, Sarah met his gaze. Then we'll adapt. That's what humans do. 72 hours later, the largest evacuation in galactic history was underway. Coalition transport ships moved in continuous streams, carrying civilians from 17 star systems to massive mobile platforms hidden in nebulae and asteroid fields. The operation was unprecedented in scope and complexity. Sarah found herself aboard the command ship, Endless Horizon, coordinating evacuation efforts for the Talax system. The ship's captain, a veteran Valdris named Thorax, had been skeptical of human involvement until he saw Sarah's logistics calculations. Your species approaches problems differently, he observed as they watched transport ships dock in perfect sequence. Most races would spend months planning such an operation. You began implementing before the planning was complete. Humans call it failing fast, Sarah explained. We'd rather try something and adjust it than wait for the perfect solution. The communication console chimed with an incoming priority message. Captain Chen, this is Admiral Thanks. Devourer scouts have been detected entering the Helix Nebula region. Estimated arrival at first target colony, 18 hours. Sarah activated the fleet communications array. All evacuation teams, this is command. We need to accelerate timeline. Repeat, accelerate timeline. Across 17 star systems, Coalition forces moved with desperate efficiency. Transport ships pushed their engines beyond safe limits. Loading procedures were streamlined far beyond normal protocols. Entire populations that had lived on these worlds for generations packed their lives into cargo containers within hours. But it wasn't enough. Karana Colony reports they need another 8 hours for complete evacuation, reported Lieutenant Zex, a young Zephyrian communications officer. Population density is higher than estimated. Sarah checked the tactical display. Devourer advanced scouts will reach Karana in 6 hours. Captain Thorax's expression darkened. We cannot evacuate 3 million civilians in 6 hours. It's mathematically impossible. Then we don't evacuate 3 million, Sarah said, her fingers flying over the tactical interface. We evacuate the 3 million that matter most, and find another solution for the rest. Captain Chen, Admiral Thanks's voice carried a warning tone. What are you proposing? Sarah highlighted several points on the planet's surface. Karana has extensive underground mining facilities, natural caves, reinforced tunnels, closed atmospheric systems. We can't get everyone off-world, but we can hide them underground until the Devourers move on. The Devourers will detect life signs, Dr. Venth objected from her position on the science vessel, Crystal Harmony. Their sensors are extremely sophisticated. Not if there's nothing to detect, Marcus replied, understanding immediately. Medical stasis, put the remaining population into suspended animation. The suggestion was radical. Stasis technology existed, but was rarely used on such a scale due to the risks involved. Equipment failure, power loss, or improper revival procedures could kill thousands. The medical risks, Captain Thorax began, are less than the certainty of death if the Devourers find them, Sarah interrupted. Sometimes the choice isn't between good and bad options. Sometimes it's between bad and worse. Within hours, coalition medical teams were deploying stasis equipment throughout Khurana's underground complexes. The technology had never been used on such a massive scale, but desperation drove innovation. Human engineers worked alongside tech scientists and Valdris medical technicians, improvising solutions in real time. "Stasis chambers online," reported Dr. Milana, the coalition's chief medical officer. 2,400,000 civilians entering suspended animation now. Sarah watched the status indicators turn green one by one. Each light represented thousands of lives hanging in the balance. Trusting in an untested strategy developed by a species, most of the galaxy still considered irrelevant. "Devourer ships detected at system perimeter," announced the tactical officer. 15 vessels, including 2 harvest ships. On the main display, the enemy fleet approached the supposedly rich colonies of the Helix Nebula. Sarah had seen Devourer ships in battle, but watching them hunt was different. They moved with predatory grace, their biomechanical hulls pulsing as they scanned for signs of life. The first colony they reached was Mindara 7, a world that had housed 12 million people just 2 days ago. Now it was empty, its cities dark, its orbital facilities abandoned. "Devourer command ship is broadcasting," reported the communications officer. "Standard domination frequencies." Sarah listened to the translation with grim satisfaction. The Devourers were confused. Their ancient protocols called for immediate harvesting operations, but there was nothing to harvest. The confusion in their transmissions was evident even through the translation software. "They're moving to the next target," Admiral Thanks reported from his flagship. "Khurana Colony." This was the real test. Would the underground populations remain undetected? Would the stasis systems function properly? Could they hide an entire civilization from beings whose entire existence revolved around finding and consuming life? Devourer ships entered Khurana's orbit like sharks circling wounded prey. Their scanning beams swept across the planet's surface, probing for any sign of the abundant life they expected to find. The surface cities were empty. The orbital stations were dark. But deep underground, 2.5 million people lay in artificial sleep, their life signs masked by technology, pushed beyond its intended limits. "Scanning patterns suggest they're detecting residual biological traces," Dr. Venth reported, her crystalline body flickering with analytical data. "But the signals are consistent with normal ecosystem activity, not civilization-level populations." Hours passed. The Devourer ships continued their search, growing increasingly agitated as they found none of the rich colonies their intelligence had promised. Their communications grew more urgent, more frustrated. "They're moving on," Sarah whispered as the enemy ships finally broke orbit. "They can't afford to waste time searching empty worlds." One by one, the Devourer fleet moved through the Helix Nebula, finding nothing but abandoned colonies and empty space. Their formation began to break apart as individual ships spread out in increasingly desperate searches for food. "This is the moment," Admiral Thanks announced. "All strike teams, commence harassment operations." Small coalition squadrons that had been hidden throughout the sector suddenly came alive. Fast attack craft emerged from asteroid fields and nebulae to hit isolated Devourer ships. The attacks were precisely coordinated. Not to destroy the enemy fleet, but to keep them moving, keep them separated, and most importantly, keep them from returning to search areas they'd already passed. Sarah watched from the endless horizon as human-designed tactics spread throughout the coalition force. Ships didn't engage in prolonged battles. They struck hard and fast, then disappeared before the enemy could respond effectively. It was guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale. "Captain Chen," General KX's voice came through on a secure channel. "Devourer fleet cohesion is breaking down. They're splitting into hunting groups." "That's what we want," Sarah replied. "Smaller groups are easier to handle, and they can't support each other effectively." The strategy was working exactly as planned. The massive Devourer fleet that had threatened 17 billion lives was fragmenting into dozens of smaller groups, each desperately searching for sustenance that wasn't there. Meanwhile, coalition strike teams continued their relentless harassment, preventing any attempt to regroup. "Devourer command ship is transmitting withdrawal signals," reported the tactical officer. "They're calling off the offensive." Cheers erupted across the coalition communication network. For the first time in decades, a major Devourer offensive had been stopped without massive casualties. The enemy was retreating, their hunger unsatisfied, their confidence shaken. But Sarah wasn't celebrating yet. "Status report on hidden populations? All stasis systems functioning normally," Dr. Milana reported. "Revival operations beginning now." Across the Helix Nebula, millions of civilians were slowly awakening from artificial sleep to find their worlds saved. The evacuation fleets began the long journey home, carrying populations back to colonies they had feared they might never see again. "Captain Chen," Admiral Thanks's voice carried something Sarah had never heard before: genuine respect. "Your strategy succeeded beyond all projections. Devourer casualties were minimal, but their offensive capability has been completely disrupted." General KX appeared on the main display, his scarred features showing something that might have been approval. "Captain, the Coalition High Command has voted to offer your species full military integration. No more observer status, full tactical command authority." Sarah felt a mix of pride and responsibility. Humanity was no longer the newcomer begging for acceptance. They were being invited to help lead a war that had shaped galactic civilization for centuries. "There's something else," Dr. Venth added, her crystalline form pulsing with excitement. "Devourer communication intercepts suggest they're changing their strategic doctrine. They're specifically adapting to counter unpredictable human tactical innovation." The implications were staggering. An enemy that had remained essentially unchanged for 2 centuries was modifying their fundamental approach to warfare because of human involvement. "They're afraid," Marcus realized. For the first time in this war, the Devourers are reacting instead of acting. Sarah nodded slowly. The galaxy had indeed underestimated humanity, but not in the way anyone had expected. Their strength wasn't in superior firepower or advanced technology. It was in their fundamental refusal to accept that problems couldn't be solved just because they'd never been solved before. The war was changing, and humanity was changing it. The whispers were becoming a roar that would reshape the galaxy itself. 6 months after the Helix Nebula victory, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Stormbreaker, the first human-designed ship to be constructed in Coalition shipyards. Around her, a mixed crew of humans and aliens worked in harmony that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The ship itself was a testament to human tactical thinking, smaller than traditional Coalition vessels, but packed with innovative systems that prioritized speed, adaptability, and unpredictability over raw firepower. "Captain, we're receiving priority transmission from Coalition High Command," announced Lieutenant Rodriguez, who now wore the insignia of a full Coalition tactical coordinator. The main display activated to show General KX's familiar form, but his expression was grim. "Captain Chen, we need your task force at the Kronos Junction immediately. The Devourers are making their final push." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The Kronos Junction was the gateway to the galaxy's core worlds, the heart of Coalition space. If it fell, the war would effectively be over. "How many ships, General?" "Over 3,000 Devourer vessels, including their command hive ships. They've concentrated everything for one massive assault. Our entire fleet is mobilizing, but intelligence suggests they've developed countermeasures for every tactic we've used in recent engagements." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. 3,000 ships was larger than any Devourer force ever assembled. It represented a fundamental shift in their strategy. from gradual consumption to total conquest. "All hands, this is the captain," Sarah announced over the ship's communication system. "Set course for Kronos Junction, maximum speed, and prepare for the fight of our lives." The Stormbreaker was part of the Rapid Response Fleet, a new formation of fast, flexible ships designed around human tactical principles. Instead of massive battleships built to survive prolonged engagements, these vessels prioritized mobility and surprise. Each ship could operate independently or as part of larger formations, adapting their role based on battlefield conditions. As they traveled through hyperspace, Sarah reviewed the intelligence reports. The Devourers had indeed been learning, but not in the way anyone expected. Rather than simply adapting to human tactics, they had fundamentally restructured their entire military approach. Their ships now operated in smaller, more flexible groups. They used false retreats and feints. They even employed what appeared to be deception and misdirection. "They're copying us," realized Commander Yaleth, a Valdris officer who had requested transfer to the human fleet after the Helix campaign. "The Devourers are using human tactical concepts, which means they think like machines copying a program," Sarah replied. "They can mimic our tactics, but they can't truly understand the thinking behind them." The Kronos Junction was a massive space station built into an asteroid field, controlling access to 3 major hyperspace routes. When the human fleet arrived, they found the largest military gathering in galactic history. Over 1,500 coalition ships from 47 different species surrounded the junction in defensive formations. Admiral Thanks commanded from the Eternal Vigilance, now designated as the coalition flagship. "Captain Chen, report to the command ship for immediate briefing." The journey across space gave Sarah time to truly appreciate the scale of what they faced. The coalition fleet was impressive, but intelligence suggested the Devourer force was twice as large. More concerning, recent battles had shown that the enemy was adapting to coalition countermeasures almost as quickly as they could be developed. The briefing room aboard the Eternal Vigilance was packed with the galaxy's most experienced military commanders. Sarah recognized faces that had fought in campaigns across dozens of star systems, beings whose tactical expertise had been forged over centuries of warfare. "The situation is straightforward," Admiral Thanks began, manipulating the holographic display to show enemy positions. "The Devourers are approaching in 3 massive waves. First contact in 8 hours. Their objective appears to be complete destruction of the Kronos Junction and elimination of our central fleet." General KX highlighted specific formations on the display. "Our conventional response would be layered defense. Absorb their initial assault, fall back to secondary positions, attempt to break their formation through concentrated firepower." "But they know that's what we'll do," added Commander Rilk. "Their formations are specifically designed to counter layered defense. They've studied our doctrine as intensively as we've studied theirs." Sarah examined the tactical display, noting the mathematical precision of the Devourer approach. Their ships moved in patterns that maximized firepower while minimizing vulnerability to known coalition tactics. It was brilliant, efficient, and utterly predictable. "They're fighting like us," she realized, "using our own strategic thinking against us." Dr. Venth's crystalline body pulsed with analytical data. "Correct. They've essentially become a mirror of coalition tactical doctrine, optimized for superior numbers and firepower." "Then we need to stop being the coalition," Sarah said quietly. The room fell silent. Admiral Thanks's 4 eyes focused on her with laser intensity. "Explain." Sarah moved to the display, her fingers dancing over the controls as she highlighted different ship groups. "They've learned to counter the coalition fleet, massive ships, layered defenses, doctrine-based tactics. But they haven't learned to counter something that doesn't exist yet." "What are you proposing?" General KX asked. "We scatter the fleet." The suggestion hit the room like a physical blow. Commander Yaleth's scarred face went pale. Captain Chen, fleet cohesion is fundamental to naval warfare. Without coordinated formations, we become unpredictable, Sarah interrupted. Look at their approach vectors. They're designed to engage a concentrated fleet using known tactics. What if we give them something they've never seen? She began redrawing formations on the display. Instead of one large fleet, we become hundreds of small task forces, no two groups using the same tactics, no predictable formations, no standard approach. Marcus stepped forward, understanding immediately. Chaos theory applied to space combat. The Devourers can't counter what they can't predict. The logistics alone would be nightmare, protested Dr. Milana from her position at the medical station. Coordination, communication, supply lines. Humans excel at chaos, Sarah replied. We've been doing it for millennia. Every human military unit is trained to operate independently when communications fail. It's not a weakness. It's our greatest strength. General KX studied the proposed formations for several minutes. You're asking every ship captain in the fleet to abandon proven doctrine and improvise their own tactics in real time. I'm asking them to trust their training, their experience, and their ability to adapt. The Devourers have learned to fight the coalition. They haven't learned to fight the imagination of 1,500 independent commanders. Admiral Thanks activated his personal communication device. Commander Grix, how quickly could we redistribute fleet communications to enable independent tactical coordination? Approximately 4 hours, Admiral. The human ships already have compatible systems installed. Captain Chen, the Admiral said slowly, your proposal essentially eliminates central command authority. Every ship becomes an independent variable in the battle equation. Yes, sir. Controlled chaos is still chaos. The decision took 3 hours of heated debate among the coalition's senior command staff. Some argued that scattering the fleet was tactical suicide. Others pointed out that conventional tactics had failed to stop Devourer advances for 2 centuries. In the end, desperation and trust in human innovation won. All ships, this is Admiral Thanks, came the fleet-wide announcement. We are implementing unconventional tactical protocol 7 Alpha. Scattered to independent operation formations. Each vessel has discretionary authority for tactical engagement. Sarah watched from the Stormbreaker's bridge as the greatest fleet in galactic history dissolved into chaos. Massive coalition battleships broke formation and spread across the asteroid field. Fast attack craft formed improvised squadrons with vessels they'd never trained with. Support ships positioned themselves in locations no doctrine had ever considered. Captain, reported the tactical officer, Devourer advanced scouts entering detection range. They appear confused. On the long-range sensors, the enemy fleet's perfect formations began to waver. Their approach had been calculated to engage a concentrated defensive force, but instead, they found scattered ships in seemingly random positions. First wave contact in 60 minutes, announced Lieutenant Rodriguez. All ships report ready for independent operation. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah had proposed a strategy that went against every principle of fleet warfare, and now 1,500 ship captains were trusting human tactical thinking with their lives and crews. The Devourer first wave arrived exactly on schedule, 800 ships moving in perfect formation, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with predatory hunger. They approached the scattered coalition forces like predators expecting organized prey. Instead, they found chaos. The battle began not with the massive engagement of fleet against fleet, but with hundreds of individual skirmishes erupting across the asteroid field. Coalition ships attacked from unexpected angles, used unconventional weapons combinations, and employed tactics that existed nowhere in any military database. A squadron of Thek crystal ships used their natural resonance abilities to create sonic barriers that disrupted Devourer navigation. Valdris heavy cruisers divided their firepower in ways that violated their own design specifications but created devastating crossfire patterns. Zephyrian fast attack craft swarmed enemy vessels like insects, using coordination patterns borrowed from their species' natural hive behavior but applied in completely new ways. "Devourer formations are breaking apart," reported the communications officer. "They can't maintain coordinated attacks against targets that aren't where they're supposed to be." Sarah watched the tactical display with growing amazement. Every coalition ship was fighting differently, adapting in real time to specific battlefield conditions. The Devourers, despite their superior numbers, found themselves unable to apply their overwhelming firepower effectively because their targets refused to behave predictably. But the real surprise came when the human ships engaged. The Stormbreaker and her sister ships had been designed with one principle in mind: adaptability. As the battle developed, they began switching roles rapidly. One moment they fought as heavy assault craft, the next as fast interceptors, then as support vessels providing cover for damaged allies. "Captain Chen," came Admiral Thanks's voice over the communications channel, "your ship's performance parameters are extraordinary." Sarah smiled grimly as she watched her crew implement the fourth different tactical configuration in 10 minutes. "Humans don't believe in fixed roles, Admiral. We believe in doing whatever the situation requires." The first Devourer wave, designed to break coalition defensive lines, instead found itself fighting a battle with no lines to break. Individual enemy ships found themselves surrounded by coalition vessels that appeared from impossible directions, struck with unprecedented tactics, then vanished before retaliation could be organized. "Second wave approaching," reported the long-range sensor operator. 1,000 ships, including command hive vessels. This was the real test. The Devourer command ships were ancient, intelligent, and possessed tactical capabilities that had evolved over millennia. If human chaos theory could confuse regular Devourer forces, the command vessels represented a completely different challenge. The second wave entered the battle space with clear intent to restore order. Command ships began broadcasting complex coordination signals, attempting to direct their scattered first-wave elements while deploying their own forces in adaptive formations. But the coalition fleet had evolved during the first engagement. Ships that had never worked together were forming spontaneous alliances. Tactics that had been improvised minutes earlier were being shared across species lines and modified for different vessel types. "The Devourers are trying to re-establish formation coherence," observed Dr. Venth from the science vessel, Crystal Harmony. "But coalition tactical adaptation is occurring faster than their ability to process and counter it." Sarah realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A battle where adaptive chaos was defeating organized precision. The Devourer's greatest strength, their ability to learn and counter enemy tactics, had become a weakness when faced with tactics that changed faster than they could be analyzed. "Third wave detected," announced the communications officer. 1,500 ships, including the primary command hive. The massive final wave approached like a moving mountain of biomechanical destruction. These were the Devourer's most powerful vessels, creatures so ancient they had been fighting when some coalition species were still discovering fire. "All ships," Sarah announced on the fleet communication network. "This is Stormbreaker. Time for maximum chaos protocol." Around the asteroid field, coalition vessels began implementing tactics so unconventional they bordered on madness. Ships designed for deep space combat dove into asteroid clusters. Heavy cruisers attempted maneuvers designed for fighters. Support vessels began acting as assault craft. The effect was exactly what Sarah had hoped for: complete tactical unpredictability on a scale that overwhelmed even ancient Devourer intelligence systems. The primary command hive, a creature older than human civilization, found itself facing a type of warfare it had never encountered. Not the organized resistance of species fighting for survival, but the controlled madness of beings who refused to be constrained by conventional thinking. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez, The command hive is broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Translation software indicates confusion, frustration, and something that might be fear. For the first time in recorded history, the Devourers were experiencing an emotion they had never known: uncertainty. Their ancient minds, perfectly adapted to counter-organized military doctrine, could not process the reality of 1,500 independent commanders, each creating their own tactical reality. The battle raged for 18 hours. When it finally ended, the Kronos Junction remained in coalition hands, and the greatest Devourer offensive force ever assembled was in full retreat. More importantly, intelligence intercepts indicated something extraordinary. The Devourer collective consciousness was experiencing what could only be described as a philosophical crisis. They're questioning their own tactical doctrine, General KX reported during the post-battle briefing. For the first time in their species' history, the Devourers are considering the possibility that their approach to warfare might be fundamentally flawed. Sarah sat in the command chair of the Stormbreaker, watching damaged Coalition ships make repairs in the asteroid field around them. The cost had been significant: over 300 ships lost, thousands of casualties, but they had achieved something no one thought possible. They had made the Devourers doubt themselves. "Captain Chen," came a transmission from Admiral Thanks. "The Coalition High Command has voted to restructure our entire military doctrine around human tactical principles. You're being offered the position of Strategic Innovation Commander for all Coalition forces." The offer was staggering: from observer status to commanding the military strategy of 47 species in less than a year. "Sir," Sarah replied, "I accept on one condition. Human tactical philosophy doesn't work if it becomes doctrine. The moment we turn innovation into procedure, we lose everything that makes it effective." General KX's image appeared on the screen, his scarred features showing something that might have been amusement. "Captain, you're suggesting we institutionalize the rejection of institutional thinking?" "Exactly, General. We teach principles, not procedures. We train adaptation, not adherence. We prepare for the unknown by accepting that the unknown is where we do our best work." Months later, Coalition Tactical Academies began teaching courses in applied chaos theory and institutional innovation. Species that had relied on military doctrine for centuries learned to question everything they thought they knew about warfare. The war against the Devourers continued, but it had fundamentally changed. No longer were Coalition forces fighting a defensive action against an implacable enemy. Instead, they were pushing forward with tactics so unpredictable that the ancient enemy found themselves constantly responding rather than acting. Deep in Devourer space, Command Hive vessels struggled with concepts they had never encountered. Their perfect military efficiency was being countered not by better efficiency, but by organized inefficiency that somehow achieved superior results. Some Devourer factions began questioning whether consumption and conquest were truly the only paths for their species. Others doubled down on traditional approaches, creating fractures in their collective consciousness that had never existed before. Sarah Chen, now Supreme Innovation Commander for the Coalition Forces, established her headquarters not in a massive command center, but in a small, fast ship that moved constantly throughout Coalition space. Her staff consisted of the most creative minds from every member species, beings who specialized not in following doctrine, but in breaking it. The humans had indeed gone from whispers to roars, but not in the way anyone expected. They had not become the galaxy's greatest warriors through superior firepower or advanced technology. Instead, they had transformed the very concept of warfare by refusing to accept that any problem was unsolvable or any enemy invincible. The galaxy would never be the same. In briefing rooms throughout Coalition space, military commanders began their planning sessions not with established doctrine, but with a simple question that had become the foundation of their new strategic philosophy. What would the humans do? And in the depths of space, where ancient devourers contemplated concepts their species had never imagined, the answer echoed through the collective consciousness. Something we've never seen before. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. Humanity had proven that sometimes the greatest strength was not knowing what couldn't be done. They had turned their inexperience into an advantage, their chaos into a weapon, and their refusal to accept limits into the foundation for a new kind of warfare. The whispers had indeed become a roar, not of conquest, but of possibility.